A pleasant day to all of us. So, what we're going to discuss for today will be on chapter 3 of our course in general sociology, which is titled Sociological Perspectives and Methodologies. So, very quick comment on the title of this chapter. You noticed that perspectives and methodologies always come together. Okay, they are inseparable in many ways because the way you look at the social world, the perspectives, should be backed up or should be supported by how you will be able to look at that world. Okay, so meaning to say, so if this is how you perceive the world, then you need also a systematic way of knowing what that world is. Okay, so there's a systematic way of gathering data, there's a systematic way of proving that knowledge that you are claiming. Because again, sociology is a science, and therefore, as a science, it has an organization or an organized way of doing research, of generating knowledge. Um, it does not just claim what it aims to claim. Okay, it does not just uh, come up with claims unfounded. So it has to substantiate all the claims and all the knowledge that it produces by having data sets and by having steps in collecting data. So this is a very important chapter because this somehow challenges the notion that sociology is less scientific, that sociologists are second class citizens, social scientists in general, by extension, are also judged to be second class citizens. When in fact, it is not true, no? What we will see in this chapter is the scientificity of the discipline. Okay? So we have many objectives to target for this chapter, first of which is for us to be able to be familiar with the three major sociological perspectives in the discipline. Two would be to have a comparison and contrast of these perspectives. Third will be to understand the scientific investigation or the nature of scientific investigation being conducted by sociologists. Fourth is for us to be able to at least review, no? Alam na natin ito, no? Yung scientific method. And of course, sociologists are guided by ethics and professional standards in the conduct of sociological investigations. So mahalaga rin na tignan natin kung ano yung mga umiiral na rules and regulations governing knowledge production in the discipline. All right, just a very quick qualifier for the major sociological perspectives. Sociology is a very diverse discipline, theoretically and methodologically. Meaning to say, in terms of theoretical perspectives, there are so many theoretical perspectives. Just to quickly give you an example of this idea, for instance, yung relational sociology, it's a theoretical movement in the discipline trying to question old perspectives in the discipline. And this new theoretical perspective called relational sociology is trying to advance, it's trying to advance the discipline. So meaning to say, if you look at the theoretical landscape of sociology, it is very diverse and multiple. Okay, you have post-structuralism, you have neo-Marxism, you have post-colonialism, global South perspectives. You also have symbolic interactionism that have already been updated. No? So you have already new schools of thought within symbolic interactionism. So napakadami. Hindi lang siya iisa or tatatlo, yung perspectives in the discipline. But these three perspectives, kumbaga, are like the major trend, major trends, in the discipline. That's why they're considered to be the three major perspectives. Let's take a look no, at what do we mean by a sociological perspective. Okay? So ang isang perspektibo ay binubuo ito ng mga idea at mga teorya, no, na ginagamit ng mga sociologists for them to be able to frame their understanding. Kumbaga, it's like a lens in a camera. It's like a bifocal that you wear, and that will change everything that you see. Okay? So, because the camera, for example, will give you a certain focus, which also prevents you to look at other possible foci or other possible areas. Okay? And just like a lens of a camera, it further narrows down what you're looking at. And just like what you do with a camera, like you try to zoom in, no, you have a particular way of looking at the object of your scrutiny. Okay, so napakahalaga ng perspective dahil it will really define what you are going to look at. So basically, ang perspektibo ay kung paano mo tignan ang isang bagay. Because how you're going to look at the world will define what you are going to look at. Okay, so the how will define what you will eventually see. So how you see will define what you see. Okay, so that's exactly, or that's in general, no, the idea of what a perspective is. Okay, so there are three major perspectives in the discipline. You have the structural functionalism, you have social conflict or conflict theory, and you have symbolic interactionism. Yung structural functionalism, itong tatlong ito, there will be a table in the next page where we will be able to differentiate, no, the various perspectives in terms of various areas. Okay? But in general, ano nga ba yung structural functionalism? The word itself is structure, no? And lahat ng struktura or patterns of interaction sa lipunan may function. Like for example, yung pattern of interaction between teachers and students, may function yan. Kasi nga, to keep children in school, to discipline them, to generate a pool of citizens who are committed to nation building. Kasi nga, ang educational institution, which is a structure in society, aims to inculcate civic consciousness, aims to inculcate voluntarism, aims to deepen our nationalism, our love for country. So, itong strukturang ito, meron siyang function na ginagampanan. And lahat-lahat ng mga struktura, structured patterns of interaction, they function to create a stable society or a society which is what we usually call in structural functionalist term, no? Which is what we call in structural functionalist terms as equilibrium. Kapag may equilibrium, ang equilibrium kasi ay parang balanced, no? Stable, okay? Hindi siya shaken, hindi siya parang it's not being disrupted, no? It doesn't mean to say that it is disruption free, but you keep society in order, no? So bakit ang mga tao, they follow rules and regulations, okay? Because education institutions have inculcated them to be able to read and perceive laws and be able to respect, no, the authority given to such laws. And maybe it's their religion that also has socialized them to become law-abiding citizens kasi nga they abide the rules and regulations of their church, no? So madaming institusyon sa lipunan na nagko-contribute for order to be established in society. Like mass media, for example, is very important in terms of information dissemination of a particular policy that the government has promulgated, no? So yung function na yon ng mass media, the patterned interaction between media producers and media consumers ay nakakatulong for societal order. Like the transfer of information about bagyo, about typhoon, will enable people to prepare. No? So lahat-lahat ng mga institusyon sa lipunan ay nag-work together. They are interdependent. And meaning to say, kapag they are interdependent, kapag pumalya yung isang institusyon ng lipunan, may epekto ito sa entire operation ng lipunan. Meaning to say, like if your educational system, for example, is flawed or defective or of low quality, okay, just like what is being thrown right now to basic education in the Philippines, because in the PISA rankings, in many international assessments, Philippines is ranking last in many of these evaluations. What does it say? Okay, and what will that have an impact on? So meron siyang impact in terms of political consciousness kasi hindi tayo masyadong scrutinizing sa mga leaders na ini-elect natin in public. No? It can also have an impact with higher education because you will get to ang makukuha mong mga quality of learners in higher education will be very, very difficult to mold. So if you look at, for example, the passing rates of many licensure examinations, yes, may mga areas na matataas talaga, institutions na matataas, pero if you look at the general picture of licensure examinations, yung national passing rate napakababa. So mortality rate, yung mga hindi nakakapasa napakataas. In my case, for example, when I took the LET, the licensure examination for teachers in 2014, we were 90,000 plus takers. For secondary ed graduates, no, or for secondary education majors, ang nangyari, we were only 28,000 who passed out of 90 plus. So the mortality rate was very high. And that's even worse than the elementary. No? So makikita mo talaga that in all professions, napakababa ng licensure examination. One reason that many sociologists of education are trying to point the finger on is yung kalidad ng basic education. So hindi na prepare ang mga bata for higher levels of learning. So makikita mo dito yung connection tuloy, no, ng pagkakaroon ng failed education system. Kasi nga nakikita mo rin yung cost niya na it's about training of teachers. The quality of teachers also define the quality of learners. Kasi nga if you look at the teachers that we have, madami sa kanila ay hindi na nag-advance ng kanilang education. They graduated with a baccalaureate degree, but they did not endeavor to at least get higher learning, no? So yun, isang epekto rin yun. Tapos yung kalidad ng mga guro na meron tayo, usually those who go to teacher education will be those who are not at the top quartile of high school graduates. Typically, those who top the list of high school graduates would be those who will be going to engineering, accountancy, and other highly paid professions. No? So, merong epekto rin, kumbaga, yung attractiveness ng teacher education because they are the ones who will be teaching our learners. So, makikita mo tuloy yung interdependence. Yun yung sinasabi ko na kapag may nagkaroon ng pagpapalya sa isa, it will have a ripple effect in society. So, that's structural functionalism. So, kaakibat nito yung salitang dysfunction. So, kung may dysfunction ang isang struktura ng lipunan, or institusyon ng lipunan, you will expect that equilibrium will be shaken. Okay? That's where problems arise kapag may dysfunction ang isang institusyon ng lipunan. For example, if you have a problem with government, okay, like in terms of prioritization, ang pinaprioritize niya ay hindi mga basic social services, kundi military spending, payment of debts, maapektuhan talaga yung operation ng mga ahensya ng pamahalaan at yung mga programa na magsusulong ng pag-unlad ng mga komunidad at ng mga individual. So makikita mo talaga yung halaga, no, ng mga institusyon sa lipunan. Okay? So that's structural functionalism. Yung susunod naman is social conflict. Basically, what it says is that society contains cleavages. And there are differentials that we have to observe, that we have to pay attention to. No? Ano tong mga differentials na ito na sinasabi ng mga conflict sociologists? Like for example, yung differentials in terms of tatlong P's, no? Property, power, and prestige. Yung sinasabi nilang property will be wealth. Okay? Wealth. Kung anong meron ka, material wealth, more specifically. Tapos, you also have power. Those who are capable of getting people to act. Okay? So, hindi rin tayo pare-pareho ng quantity that we possess in terms of power. Also, prestige, hindi rin pare-pareho, no? Like, may mga tao na napaka-prestigious, they are being respected for their scholarly work, for example, but in terms of property, they don't have any. Okay? Pwede rin ganun yun, no? So, you can be popular, but it doesn't mean to say that you're wealthy. Okay? So, and so forth, no? So, yun yung social conflict. And ang perspective na ito, kapag tinitignan niya ang lipunan, palagi niyang tinitignan na merong inequality. Okay? Palagi niyang tinitignan na merong parte ng lipunan na nagbe-benefit. Those who get benefited, those who get blessed, those who are being pampered by institutions, no? And there are those who are kept excluded. Okay? Because there is a hidden agendum, okay, to keep people excluded so that others will be the only ones benefiting. So kung social conflict ang pagtingin mo sa mga bagay-bagay, like for example, when you look at education, you will look at education as a microcosm of an unequal society. Because tignan mo na nga lamang yung academic performance ng mga institutions. Why do these institutions perform better than others? It's because of the differentials in resources. Okay? Like you look at Harvard, look at institutions in the West that are highly funded, that you see a lot of donations coming in. So in terms of resources, in terms of the prestige of the faculty that they have, in terms of the power of these institutions to shape the discourse in the various disciplines. So, kasi, syempre, magkakaiba ng kalidad ng mga tao that you employ in academic institutions. That's why you see a lot of differences in terms of rankings, in terms of popularity, in terms of the level of education that they provide to learners. So that's social conflict. You always look at dahilan yan ng inequality ng lipunan. Okay? May mga sadyang nabiyayaan, may mga sadyang hindi. Okay? Kasi nga, may mga interest ang mga tao that they wanna keep, that they wanna protect. Okay? Now, yung symbolic interactionism naman, kakaiba siya dahil ang pagtingin niya sa tao ay meaning maker. Okay? So, individuals and by extension, organizations and society at large are meaning makers. Meaning to say, when there are events that are happening, different people will make different meanings out of it. Okay? Like for example, ang dami-dami nating karanasan dyan na kung saan iba-iba yung ating pag-meaning make ng mga bagay-bagay. No? Pwedeng like for example, I'm watching To Have and To Hold, no? Sa GMA 7. I'm not promoting, pero you might want to take a look at that very, very nice television series. Hindi siya series parang drama siya, no, sa GMA. Yung pagbe-betray, okay, ng asawa sa isa, okay? That can mean talagang, of course, you look at that as a betrayal. You make a meaning out of it na talagang your wife cheated on you, okay? And she's to blame for what happened to your marriage, okay? But yung isa naman, pwedeng ang pagtingin mo sa nangyari is ikaw ay may pagkukulang. Okay? What you are meaning, the meaning that you make out of that instance of betrayal is that nagawa niya yun dahil wala akong time para sa kanya. Kasalanan ko kung bakit nagloko ang asawa ko. So, meaning to say, meaning maker ang tao. Okay? And yung meaning na nakikreate niya, it's a product of the relationships that the person has. Okay? So anong ibig sabihin ng symbolic interactionism or anong nais niyang sabihin? Na ang tao mag-a-act siya based on the meanings that they put into things. So kapag magkakaroon ng social interaction, pag may meet ang tao, may mabubuong meaning out from it. At yung meaning na yon ay yun yung pinaka-foundation ng lipunan. Okay? So, ang lipunan ay binubuo therefore hindi ng individual, kundi ng mga social interactions. Because these social interactions are generative and productive of meanings. And these meanings are what constitute society. Okay? So, mamaya makikita pa natin kung ano bang ibig sabihin ng symbolic interactionism by also trying to go back to the very meat or to the very principle based on the person who coined symbolic interactionism. Okay? Now, let's take a look at the differences of these perspectives. Merong mga iba't ibang areas like for example, assumptions, proponents, levels of analysis, yung subject under focus, magkakaiba sila, no? May pagkakaiba, may mga convergence din at some point. Now, let's take a look at the basic assumption. So, ang ina-assume palagi ng structural functionalism ay may iba't ibang mga institusyon sa lipunan that are working together. Okay? That are working together to maintain balance or equilibrium. That's the basic assumption palagi ng structural functionalism. Palagi mong titignan yung interdependence ng mga bagay-bagay. Hindi mo lang siya ina-associate yung failure sa isang institusyon sa lipunan. Like for example, the idea of the family or a broken family, for example. You don't just put it in isolation. Okay? You also have to look at what's going on with the society. What the state is doing. What the economy or ano yung pangyayari sa market na nag-uudyok for families to break apart. Okay? So you also have to look at the interdependence of things. Kapag ikaw ay gumagamit ng structural functionalist na perspective. Kapag naman conflict yung perspective mo, palagi mong titignan na ang pamilya, for example, is an arena of struggle between the head of the family and of course you have the wife, for instance, medyo may pagka-sexist tayo doon, na palaging sumusunod sa gusto ng asawa. But again, ang family is an arena of struggle. My struggle for power, my struggle for prestige, my struggle for property. Palaging ganun ang tinitingnan natin kapag conflict yung pagtingin natin. Kapag tinitingnan natin, for example, yung isang workplace, we always look at competition among workers for power, for promotion, and for everything. Okay? Kapag conflict yung ating pagtingin. Kapag naman symbolic interactionism yung ating pagtingin, tinitignan natin hindi yung individual, okay? Kundi yung mga interaction that the individual engages in and how meanings are created. For example, if you want to understand crime, you don't just want to say that criminals tend to be poor tend to be criminals, na ang pumapatay ay yung mga mahihirap dahil, say, gagamitin mo ang conflict, wala silang resources. They don't have the means to protect themselves from accusation because rich people will define them as criminals because who would have the motivation to steal, for example? Who would have the motivation to be hired to kill someone? Poor people. So kung conflict yung pagtingin mo, medyo may ganun kang klase ng conclusion na ma-generate. Pero kapag symbolic interactionism ka, wait lang. Ano bang nangyari sa krimen? Or pupuntahan natin yung crime, yung event that led to the death of another or to the murder of another or if it's a robbery, for instance, pupunta ka doon. Ano bang nangyari? What was the interaction like? Okay? Nagalit ba yung tao? Was it an emotional catharsis that was released and because of that, the individual lose his rational mind and suddenly inflicted pain which resulted to death. So titignan mo yung moment of interaction as a very important generating factor of the meaning. Ano yung pagpatay para sa taong ito? Pinatay ba niya dahil nagalit siya, yung ego niya natapakan? Na lumabas yung kanyang galit at emosyon na hindi naman niya talaga gustong patayin yung asawa niya, kundi the heated exchange led to it. No? So basically, yung symbolic interactionism, nais niyang makita yung mga moments na ganito na hindi natin masyadong nakikita because these are private things, right? That's why you have to interview the individual. You have to make the person recall what happened. Okay? Yun yung symbolic interactionism. Interesting siya dahil talagang makikita mo kung ano yung nangyari sa mismong moment of interaction. Paano na-generate yung meaning? Ano ba yung mahal ba niya yung taong ito? Pero bakit niya pinatay? No? So makikita mo doon kung ano yung pagpapahalaga, ano yung meaning na generate doon out of that interaction. So you don't quickly judge the individual as poor. And that poverty is the reason why the individual committed crime. Because that would be too much of a jump. Diba? Kailangan malaman mo, no, kung ano bang nangyari mismo sa interaction na yun. So may mga proponents, ang mga iba't ibang schools of thought na ito sa sociology. For example, pinaka-advocate ng structural functionalism would be Émile Durkheim, a French sociologist. No? Kasi dito pinapakita niya yung kahalagahan ng solidarity in society. So all institutions perform their functions, and because of that, because they perform their functions, na appreciate natin yung mga ginagawa nila, na function nila. Like for example, in this pandemic, we appreciate so much the work of our healthcare workers, and so we don't do anything that will discourage them, or we are not gonna pick a fight with them. Okay, so we maintain solidarity in society. No, you also have Robert Merton, who introduced the concept of latent and manifest functions. Although we don't have time to really look into these terms, no, but simple lang din naman yung mga terms na yun, no? But we will not have a discussion of those terms by Merton. Yung conflict naman, of course, ang pinaka-proponent dyan ay yung German philosopher and sociologist Karl Marx, no? Who introduced the idea of class struggle, okay? Na ang lipunan ay binubuo ng mga classes who are in struggle for power, prestige, and property. Okay? That you have to look at society as composed of conflicts. Okay? And then, of course, Du Bois, who focus on racial relations dahil nakikita niya na ang lipunan din, no, ay makikita mong struggle among different ethnicities. Okay? And symbolic interactionism ay madami rin ang nag-advocate nito. Malimit na sinasabi palagi si Herbert Mead, tapos sina Goffman, at saka si Peter Blau. Ngunit ang gusto kong i-highlight din dito ay yung mismong nag-articulate at nag-flesh out ng symbolic interactionism as a perspective. No? Meron siyang libro, published in 1969 if I'm not mistaken, or 1963, si Herbert Blumer. Siya yung talagang nag-outline ng principles of symbolic interactionism. Right? So, I don't know if we will be able to touch on Herbert Blumer in higher social classes. But I think mahalaga rin na makita natin kung ano nga ba, no? Kasi siya yung nag-coin ng salitang symbolic interactionism. So, madami siyang doon, may mga premises na kailangang alalahanin about symbolic interactionism, and meron din siyang reminder na kapag symbolic interactionism yung gagamitin mo, dapat you are true to the methods that you're going to use. So, dapat may alignment yung perspective at saka yung metodo na gagamitin mo kapag uunawain mo ang lipunan using symbolic interactionism. Now, in terms of the level of analysis, ang structural functionalism, kasi mga institusyon ang pinag-uusapan, no? At saka kung paano sila nagko-collaborate to be able to generate balance in society, talagang napaka-macro ng pagtingin. If say level of analysis, ano yung saang level mo siya inuunawa? Okay? Do you look at individuals? Do you look at groups? Or do you look at society at large? So kapag macro, societal yung pagtingin. Yung conflict naman may pagka-macro din siya, no? At may pagka-meso din siya, yung mga grupo-grupo, no? Organizations. Even structural functionalism can also be meso. Meso is the mid-level, which is more on the organizational level, no? Tapos micro would be the individual level. And this is where symbolic interactionism is very interested in. But let me clarify, no? Because I have a Facebook post, I think, I was commenting on a former student who posted this, and parang kinonflate niya or binox na niya, no, yung symbolic interactionism as purely micro in terms of orientation. But I beg to differ dahil sinasabi ni Herbert Blumer na even if micro yung focus niya, yung individuals, meron siyang terminology na ginamit para sabihin din na even symbolic interactionism is interested with the macro level. Meron siyang term na ginamit doon, which is concatenation, which basically means that yes, even if the meaning making happens at the individual level, it doesn't mean to say that it ends there. No? It doesn't mean that it ends there. Actually, yung meaning making na ito, it can be done by organizations, by groups. Okay, like for example, MMSU with a university in Canada, for instance, having a partnership, that's a meso level of interaction. And if you want to do macro, you have the Philippines and Australia, for example, having interaction in terms of partnership in education. So it is not limited to individuals only. Okay? So yun yung point din ni Herbert Blumer. So yung levels of analysis, actually yung symbolic interactionism, it can be macro, it can be meso, it can also be micro. So it hits all levels of analysis. No? Now, in terms of the subject under focus, so ang pinaka-focus talaga ng structural functionalism is social solidarity. Okay? Because, just to give you a quick background, the reason why the focus of functionalist perspective is more on social solidarity, it's because one of the main criticisms towards modern society, di ba, sociology is the study of modern society dahil pinanganak ito sa panahon ng great social transformations. So, ang nice nilang malaman, itong mga pagbabago ba ito, yung Industrial Revolution, yung French Revolution, do they lead to disruptions? Do they lead to the disintegration of society? Dahil nawawala na tayo doon sa traditional na pamamaraan ng pamumuhay where we are collective in orientation, we value one another, no? Talagang we are the same in terms of values. Ngayon, magkakaiba na tayo. May specialization na, may differentiation na, iba-iba na yung ginagawa natin, therefore iba-iba na rin yung vina-value natin. Ang tanong ng mga marami, will this modern society lead to individualism, egoism, and therefore lack of social cohesion? Yung pinaka-argumento dito ni Emil Durkheim ay hindi nawawala ang social solidarity, kundi nagkakaroon ng pagbabago or nagkakaroon ng bagong base of social solidarity. That's why the focus of structural functionalism is to look at those bases of social solidarity or social cohesion. For conflict naman, ang pinaka-interest talaga niya ay yung pagbabago sa lipunan. Because if there is class struggle, kung may kompetisyon, may bangayan, it will lead to change. Okay? Kasi nga, parang ang sinasabi dito ni Marx ay, hindi lahat ng pagbabago ay nadadaan sa consensus, sa agreement. Kung minsan, kailangan din natin ng disagreement para magkaroon ng pagbabago. Okay? I think that speaks a lot. That speaks volumes about how important disagreements and conflicts are for social change to happen. Because if no one will gonna point out what is wrong, if no one will criticize that something is not right or something is amiss, then no one will bother to change it. Correct? Kaya nga, ang pinaka-popular na quotation na ma-associate kay Marx palagi is sabi niya kasi sa kanyang thesis on Feuerbach, the fourth thesis on Feuerbach, ito yung parang isang article na ginawa ni Marx, no? Ang pinaka-popular na quotation that we know about Marx is, sabi ni Marx, philosophers have interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. So talagang social change yung kanya pinupunto. Yung symbolic interactionism naman in terms of the subject of its focus will be interactions. So not individuals, okay? Interaction, basta merong interaction ng tao, sinasabi niya kung ano yung gustong mangyari, tapos nagkakaroon ng meaning making out of that social interaction, pasok yon sa focus ng ng symbolic interactionism. Kasi ang interaction pwedeng hindi lang individual ang mag-engage in social interactions. Now, we also have the nature of society. For structural functionalism, ang pinaka-nature ng lipunan ay social institutions are in consensus. In consensus in terms of the goals of society, as well as in consensus in terms of how to achieve these goals. Okay, like for example, talk about SDGs, no? Lahat ng parte ng mundo ay they virtually all no agree on the sustainable development goals ng United Nations, and they pursue these goals no proactively and aggressively as well, no? So talagang we are working together to be able to ensure sustainable development for the next generations to come. Right? So mga ganon. Yun yung pinaka-nature ng lipunan kapag yun yung pagtingin natin. Ano? Tapos, for conflict, hindi. May interest palagi yung mga powerful. Okay? And the powerful will continue to wield whatever they have just to maintain their privileged position in society. Okay? So medyo may pagka-pessimistic yung pagtingin ng conflict perspective. Yung symbolic interactionism naman ay ang lipunan ay binubuo ng pagmi-meaning making ng tao. Okay? Nakadepende ito sa pag-interpret ng tao. Okay? Nakadepende ito sa pagpapahalaga, okay, the valuing and the interpretation and the meaning making that people will have, okay, of certain events, no? Do you look at climate change as a threat now, as a threat forever? Do you look at COVID as something that will totally change the world, or is it just gonna disrupt and then we will be back to normalcy? So nakadepende yun sa pag-meaning making natin. Okay? Now, for the view on social change, of course, alam natin na ang conflict dito ay talagang meron siyang stance regarding social change. But other perspectives like symbolic interactionism and structural functionalism also have, meron din silang konsepto or meron din silang take on social change. Let's take a look at what structural functionalism have to say or has to say. Sabi niya, yung interrelated parts ay stable because of the agreement, the consensus. Okay, each part has a particular function to fulfill, So basically, ang sinasabi dito ng structural functionalism, kung may pagbabago man, medyo hindi mabilis ang pagbabago. Okay? Ang pagbabagong ito ay dapat dumaan sa consensus, dapat gusto ng lahat, Kasi nga, ang mahirap dito ay ang pagbabago ay hindi malimit yung pagbabago. I mean, it's not as frequent as we would look at if we are using the conflict perspective. Dahil nga, they want to maintain. They want to maintain the status quo as much as possible because that has been agreed upon. Pero kung meron mang pagbabago, it will take time. Pero with conflict, mabilis ang pagbabago. Okay? And change should be drastic. It should not be staggered. It should not be cumulative. It should be now. Ganun yung pagtingin ng mga Like, if there's something wrong, change the entire system. For structural functionalism, if there's something wrong, let's identify which part is defective or dysfunctional. And from there, let's reform, not totally transform. Okay, so magkaiba sila ng pananaw in terms of social change. Itong isa, holistic, yung gusto niya, major social change. Itong isa, minor. Bakit minor? Naunawaan natin, di ba, kung bakit minor yung pagtingin niya in terms of social change dahil kung babaguhin mo ang lahat-lahat, interdependent ang mga systems or ang mga struktura So kung may pagbabago in one part, it will have a ripple effect. So medyo dangerous yun. Adventurous masyado yun. Okay? So itong conflict perspective, ang gusto niya, kung babaguhin na nga lang din natin, baguhin na natin lahat. Kasi nga, hindi rin magbabago ang entire society kung hindi mo babaguhin fundamentally. Okay? Kung pa-reform ka lang, band-aid solution lang yan. Why not just abolish, for example, private property? Because the presence of private property will make people self-aggrandize themselves or self-aggrandize themselves. Will make people self-enrich. No? Kasi mayroong palaging motivation to preserve and to pass on property to the next generation. No? So may mga ganong klase ng debate rin, no? within sociology. For for symbolic interactionism, yung meaning making, yun yung source ng change. No? So ibig sabihin yung engagement natin, interaction natin with others will have an impact if the meanings that we create will be subjected to change. Okay? So mahalaga na tignan natin yung mga instances na nagkakaroon ng interaction at doon, in that interaction, binabago ba nila? May pagnanais ba silang baguhin? No? So, palaging dapat babalik tayo sa moment, okay, of interaction because that's where meanings are created. And if the meaning being created is for us to have a wind of change, then you have to understand what causes that aspiration for change. Okay? So, in terms of social order, no, yung order sa lipunan for structural functionalism will be maintained because of consensus. Okay? Because of shared values. Okay? People cooperating, doing their own part, role fulfillment, meaning to say, institutions will continue to perform the mandated and the expected functions that they have to fulfill. Okay? Pero kapag conflict, ang social order ay na-maintain because a very powerful group will continue to threaten weaker groups that if they behave poorly or if they behave unexpectedly, punishment will follow. And surely in that moment, they will become losers. And elites, the privileged and the powerful will emerge triumphant. So palaging ganun, yung palagi nilang paano nila na-maintain, no, yung social order. One example that comes to mind, no, would be how employers would continue to threaten their employees not to pick a fight with the management, because if they do that, they will be out of job. No? And people, ordinary people who depend on their daily wage for living, would behave accordingly and would not endanger the only lifeblood that they have. Okay? So yun yung mga ganon, yun yung pagtingin mo kapag conflict perspective. Seemingly there is order, but in that order there is repression, there is exploitation, the constant attempt to silence voices. Okay? Yun yung ina-uncover kapag conflict yung pagtingin. Okay? Now, kapag naman maintenance of social order, makikita mo dito that interactions are very important. They have to be very clear. Okay? Ano bang gusto mong mangyari? Ano ba yung meaning na gusto mong isend sa akin? Did I get it correctly? No? So institutions, if you are going to use symbolic interactionism to look at the macro level, then you have to look at how institutions communicate. No? Okay? Like for example, 'di ba may mga problema ngayon sa ating gobyerno kung saan nagbabangayan ang dalawang branches of government. Ano bang gusto mong mangyari, Senate? Ano rin ba ang gusto mong mangyari, Executive? Kasi yung Senado, ang gusto niya mangyari, get to the bottom of the truth if formally is indeed violating rules and regulations, no? Ang pagtingin naman kasi ng ehekutibo dito, ang nakikita ng meaning making dito ay you're not doing this. The meaning of what you're doing is not in aid of legislation, diba? That's in aid of election. So nakikita natin 'yan sa mga reports, ano. So makikita mo doon kung ano nga ba yung nakikita mo yung pag-meaning making ay may epekto in terms of order in society. So that can lead to constitutional crisis if this gets worse. No? But I hope it won't lead to that. Now, yung mga keywords na kailangang alalahanin sa mga iba't ibang perspectives na ito. For structural functionalism, you have the word equilibrium, the word structure, function. No? Kapag naman conflict, social class, coercion, yan, power, change. For ano naman, symbolic interactionism, meaning. Okay, syempre, interaction. Very important. So, ang mga tanong na tinatanong palagi ng mga structural functionalists would be, how is society integrated? How does it maintain social solidarity? Okay? How do the parts, okay, collaborate, agree, and work together? Okay? Yun yung palaging tinitingnan ng structural functionalism. Kapag naman conflict, what are the social divides in society? Okay? Ano yung mga social cleavages sa lipunan? And ano yung mga iba't ibang patterns of social inequality? Like for example, gender inequality. Okay? So kapag inequality pa lamang ang tinitignan, talagang i-expect mo na may pagka-conflict na yung perspective. Kapag naman ang tanong niya ay, paano ba ang tao, no? Or ano ba ang pagpapakahulugan ng tao sa poverty, for example? Kapag yun yung tanong mo, ano bang ibig sabihin ng tao sa poverty? How do they make sense of poverty? Okay, is it a blessing? Is it a function of talent? Is it a function of lack of intelligence? Is it a function of what? No? Kung ano yung pagpapahalaga nila. Okay? It's a function of nothing because what is important is not your material possession. It is what you feel, how contented you are. So, iba-iba ang pagtingin ng tao sa iba't ibang bagay. So, kapag ganun yung pagtatanong mo, no, that in a way you're trying to make sense of how people, no, create meanings, okay, out from their interactions with others. Right. So, yun yung mga tatlong perspectives in sociology. Okay? Now, what about yung scientific investigation? Remember that sociology is a scientific enterprise. And all scientific enterprises are rooting on investigation as their basis for claiming truth or for claiming knowledge or for making knowledge claims. No? So ano ba yung mga iba't ibang features, no, ng sociological investigation? So una, dapat yung sociologist, kailangan ay yung pag-interpret niya ng ebidensya ay base sa isang scholastic tradition at hindi sa personal na paniniwala. Okay? So kailangan klaro na ini-interpret ko ang isang bagay using this particular theoretical lens, not my religious lens. Okay? Kasi nga value-free ka. Because religious perspectives tend to occupy or tend to take moral positions and thus will generate moral judgments which makes you not neutral. No? Kailangan dapat ay ginagamit mo yung disiplina mo, no? Yung scholastic traditions ng disiplina for you to be able to come up with your knowledge claims. Okay? Objectivity is the second feature, which is a very important trait, no, ng isang sociologist. Objective ka dahil yung pag-select mo ng topic, it's because of the gaps in your discipline, not because you have an investment on it, not because you have a stake on it, or you want to benefit yourself for it. Okay? So objectivity is very important. Yung paggamit natin ng systematic research method. If you say systematic, klaro sa iyo na ito yung mga iba't ibang steps. Okay? Systematic dahil itong mga gagawin mo ay magkadugtong at meron silang relationships. Hindi arbitrary. Ay, dito't kayat ko. Like for example, ti kuma obra emket ag-observe, no? Na papaspasamak, kaputa nakitam tay kayat mon, pimanaw kan. Okay? Hamong inbaybayag ti panagstay mo, tatlong makitam kumanon at papaspasamak na talaga. So you're cherry picking what you would like to see. That's not good, no? That's why it's important to have a systematic research method. Tapos, ilalagay mo doon, no? Kung ano yung mga nakita mo, ano yung mga napag-usapan kapag interview, hindi kapag interview, nag-interview ka, tapos itatranscribe mo yung interview, itatype mo ngayon, ang ilalagay mo lang ay yung gusto mong marinig. Hindi pwede yun. Kailangan buong buo yung transcripts ng interview. Okay? Tapos, syempre, dapat may ebidensya. Kasi may mga photos, documents, excerpts from the transcripts, no, of your interviews. Kailangan may backup palagi lahat. No? It can be secondary evidence, things that you get from those who had a first-hand collection of the data, like agencies in government like Philippine Statistics Authority would gather data. You can get data from them because it's also open for public consumption. Number 5 would be the capacity of being scrutinized. Okay? Mahalaga that you share your work so that it can be peer validated and peer scrutinized. Dapat ay pwede siyang i-falsify, no, ng mga kasamahan natin sa disiplina. Right? Yan. Bakit ko nilagay ang level of analysis? Okay, dito yung level of analysis, dapat. Okay. Kasi, okay, na-mention ko naman yung mga iba't ibang levels of analysis kanina. We will just quickly run through them. Kapag micro, again, you are looking at the individual and the interaction of individuals with others. Kapag meso level, you have culture and organization. So communities, no? Organizations like academic institutions having partnerships with, say for example, industry partners, no? So meso level of analysis yon, no? Kapag naman macro level would be societal, like it can be countries to countries, or it could be a region, no? Or it could be an entire population with another entire population. Like for example, the interaction of the Chinese with the Romans, no? Babalik tayo sa Silk Road, for example, no? May mga ganong kwento, no? Macro level would be very, very difficult to capture. You really need a lot of resources, no? Kasi nga, we don't have a chance also to participate in closed-door meetings between state officials. Kapag ito ay may state visit, may mga foreign visitors tayo, we don't usually get inside and be able to know what's really going on. Even meso level, medyo mahirap din na pumasok sa mga organizations. But of course, we have to go through their entry process before we can begin our study. Of course, we also have the scientific method as a very important guide in how we generate knowledge. Dahil this is how we generate knowledge. Okay? The scientific method. Okay? Knowledge is produced scientifically through the scientific method. So there are many steps. You observe, okay, the phenomenon of your interest. You read about it. That's why you do RRL. Number 2, although that's also related to number 2, number 2 is you dive deep into that phenomenon of interest by reading scholarly works that have been published or even unpublished can be included. And then after that, you can identify now the gap. Ano pa yung hindi natin alam? Or nalaman na natin pero may pagkukulang yung pag-aalam natin. So kailangan nating mag-formulate na ng mga tanong. So because of these gaps that I saw, no, this is what I'm going to study. Okay? So ganun yung ating number 2. Number 3, number 4 rather, would be, okay, kung ito yung mga tanong natin, how are we going to answer them? What are the methods that we're going to use for us to be able to conduct this research? So magde-design ka na ngayon. Kung gusto mo ba, ano bang information that you are after for? What type of information are you seeking? Are you seeking for quantitative information? Are you seeking for qualitative information? So if you're seeking for stories and narratives, then you're going to design the method that way. Then you're going to have data collection techniques like observation, like interviewing, or focus group discussion if you like to get people to interact. No? So nakadepende sa pagnanais mo at sa research question mo rin. Okay? And then you will gather the data. No? You bring people who will serve as your research participants. Or in quantitative researches your respondents if you want to do a survey, for example. Okay? And then after collecting the data, you have to properly store them, organize them so that they will be ready for analysis. Okay? Analysis is very important. So like for example in sociology, we do have a lot of analytical techniques, discursive or discourse analysis. We have thematic analysis. Okay, if you're dealing with quantitative data, you do statistical analysis of your data. So we use, for example, a variety of softwares today. I think many social scientists are familiar now with many statistical tools, freewares that we use. Like for example, I use GMOV to understand descriptives and also have to make some inferential statistics, out from the bunch of data that I have, the data set that we were able to collect from surveys. Okay, so yun yung mga pwede natin gawin. And then of course, you now create the report, the research manuscript that can be shared to a different platform. If you want to get that published in a journal, or do you want that to appear as a terminal report, and whatever that is, the goal is to communicate the findings of that research. And of course, to outline what you did so that others will be able to replicate the steps and see if you did correctly. You did it correctly. And then in gathering data, some just notes on data gathering techniques here that are very important. Ano yung mga iba't ibang data gathering tools that social scientists use? One is observation. Okay, observation is when you sit down or when you are in a community and you have specific things to look at. Like, paano yung mga bata mag-respect sa mga matatanda in the community? So you want to jot down all these instances where there is an interaction. Okay? Observation ang tawag natin doon. It's a very common technique. Like when you go for an interview, you are doing interview at the same time you are doing observation. Because you are observing already the participant in that research. Paano siya magsalita? Confident ba siya? Mga ganon, di ba? So mahalaga yung observation. Like for example, observation is very important. Like when you go around the city, you observe where the water supplies are, kung saan yung mga water stations, kung saan yung mga bilihan ng liquefied gas. Mahalaga ang observation. It's a very important technique. Participant observation is you are taking part in a particular activity. Like for example, it's a religious ritual and you are joining that ritual. Okay? So that's participant observation. Para malaman mo rin kung ano yung nafe-feel nila. Hindi lang you are jotting down that they are laughing. You are jotting down that they are crying. But ikaw mismo na-experience mo umiyak because of your participation in that ritual. Of course, interview is a very popular one, and we have the interview of Bong Bong by Tony. I don't want to comment on that because again, the interview that we do academically is different. Okay, it's different. It's informed by your research problems and then by the methods that you selectively choose. No, and then you also have questionnaire. I'm not sure if you are familiar with questionnaire, but I know that you have been answering many questionnaires when you come to the university, like questionnaire regarding your internet connectivity, the gadgets that you use, questionnaire yon. Okay, yung may mga chine-check ka using Google Forms, may mga ganun. But of course, madaming iba't ibang paraan for questionnaires to be floated. No? Madami na tayo ngayon na tools online. Tapos you also have focus group discussions where like there are 10 to 12 people there or around less than 10 even na kung saan may topic kayong pag-discuss. Okay? And lahat will have the chance to speak. Okay? So maganda rin yun dahil kapag nahihiya kung minsan kasi yung isang tao na mag-share ng information kapag one-on-one interview, no? Mas confident siya kapag may mga kasama siya. Pwedeng ganun yung gawin natin kapag yun yung magiging choice natin in terms of data collection because we are considering the characteristics of our participants. Historical method is basically when you look at data, no? Like archival research. Punta ka sa isang library, tignan mo yung mga naisulat na about a particular place. So mag-excavate ka ngayon, hindi yung physical excavation but mag-excavate ka ng mga dokumento para makita mo kung ano ba yung uh, yung history ng isang bagay or ng isang place, no? Or ng isang tao. Okay? Document analysis will be gathering many documents, different types of documents, no? Whether correspondences ng mga prisoners sa kanilang mga pamilya, pwede mong i-analyze kung ano yung mga sinasabi nila, given that they have the opportunity to tell something to their relatives or to their family, what do they say? So, pwedeng content analysis ang gawin mo doon. Case study would be you're selecting, for example, a particular organization, like, say, a fan group. That's what you want to study. Ano bang ginagawa ng mga fan members? And what is the interaction of the fan with the idol? Okay? So that's a case study that you want to do. So yung sociology guided kami by Code of Ethics, and we have the actually it's the International Sociological Association, ISA, no longer just the American Sociological Association, setting, no? Kung ano dapat yung gagawin ng mga researchers. Like for example, we should have objectivity and integrity in doing research. Meaning to say, we cannot just copy the works of authors without providing acknowledgement that we are borrowing this idea from them. Integrity is very important. We cannot, of course, commit plagiarism. That's very bad. Okay? Tapos, we also have to respect the privacy and dignity of our participants. Like for example, I was correcting this manuscript of my thesis advisee dahil sabi niya, ang isa sa mga participants niya ay children. Tapos, hindi daw niya kukunin yung permission from the parents para sa ganun ay makapagsalita yung mga bata. Sabi ko, hindi pwede yon kasi they are still under the legal protection of their parents, and their involvement in research must be accompanied by a consent. And usually, if there are children, there is parental consent. So meaning to say, you protect the privacy and dignity, no, of your participants. You don't want to put them in harm kasi baka malalaman pala ng parents nila na nakipag-participate sila sa isang research without their consent. So mag-aaway sila tuloy. No? So baka hindi nabigyan ng allowance, for example, yung bata, kasalanan mo pa na researcher. So hindi dapat ganun. Tapos, syempre, you don't just divulge the information shared by your participants dahil napaka-interesting na kwento mo rin sa mga friends mo. Hindi po pwede yon. Tapos, sinabi mo pa kung saan nanggaling, sino yung mga taong ito. Tapos, yung pala, kakilala. No? So, yun na nasabi rin na bumalik doon sa participant mo, hindi ka nang pagkakatiwalaan ng mga participants kapag sinishare mo yung mga sinare nila. Kasi they shared that in good faith, knowing that you are gonna just use it for academic purpose. Hindi po yun academic purpose kapag ginamit natin sa mga chika-chika natin at sharing natin sa mga kaibigan. Hindi po pwede yun. Okay? And of course, dapat, number 4, nasabi ng ISA, or in this case, the American Sociological Association, acknowledge research collaboration and assistance, okay, from other sources. Like for example, syempre kapag ito ay funded research, kailangan mong sabihin dahil kung minsan may conflict of interest yan. No? So, kailangan sabihin po natin kung sino ang nagpondo ng ating survey, sino po yung nagpondo ng ating research. Okay? So, dapat i-disclose yung mga ganong klase ng information. So, itong code na to, fina-follow ng mga sociologists at meron bang punishment kapag hindi? Meron din, no? Meron din siyang talagang kaakibat na disciplinary action coming from, if you are part of the Philippine Sociological Society, for instance, and they might not want to renew your membership, or they will have some dialogue with you so that you will have to be disciplined para hindi mo na siya gawin. Kasi if that instance will happen again, no, you will definitely not be counted as member of the society. So may mga ganun ding mga organizational policies ng iba't ibang professional organizations in the social sciences. I'm not just sure with your case, but it's better to check your website, yung website ng mga organizations ninyo, yung Philippine Communicators Society, mga ganon, para alam nyo din no, kung ano yung mga alituntunin ng mga organizations natin in the social sciences pertaining to the code of conduct. Okay, napakahalaga na we follow also the professional and ethical guidelines of our organizations, because in knowledge generation, we are not just purely producing knowledge. We have sources of the knowledge that we produce, and we should respect the sources as well. We have to protect them. We have an obligation to the information shared to us as researchers. Okay? So, while we produce knowledge, we also have to observe ethics. Okay? So, yun yung chapter 3 natin. If you have questions, feel free to comment below. We'll wait for your insights. Thanks.